Hi, I'm Lisa Dahl, health and well-being coach. Welcome to Getting Healthy Without Rules. This show is about understanding the things that impact your wellness and finding ways to improve it. In this show, we take a non-diet, no-rules approach to health and wellness. Health and wellness is a moving target, and we all have different needs and opportunities to improve it. This approach allows you to make the best choice with the information you have right now. It helps you to be present, flexible, and resilient. In addition, I support you in moving from judgment to curiosity and offering yourself self-compassion. It is time we are all a little kinder to ourselves. Today's episode is about boundaries, why we need them, and how they are interconnected with the many other aspects affecting our health. Do you ever feel like other people's demands derail your time and priorities? Does an unsolicited comment about your choice stress you out, even if it comes from someone close like a parent or partner? As a health and wellness coach, I often see this happen. We get caught up trying to meet everyone else's expectations at the expense of our own needs and goals. Setting clear boundaries is essential to staying focused, reducing anxiety, and nurturing our mental health. Boundaries allow us to prioritize self-care, maintain healthy relationships, and live authentically. Without boundaries, we lose a sense of control and empowerment. With boundaries, we can manage interactions that cause undue stress and build self-esteem. Today, my guest will share tangible tips to set boundaries that respect your needs and establish a sense of emotional security. You deserve to feel empowered to make choices that align with your values without apology. Let's talk about how to get there. Today, we dive into what are clear and firm boundaries, the challenges we have about setting them, how they affect us personally and professionally, and the benefits we experience when setting and holding them. Be sure to stay until the end for this week's healthy practice to help you learn how to set your first intentional boundary. I'm excited to introduce today's expert guest, Ellie Lane. She has over 30 years of experience, is a seasoned advisor guiding women toward personal and professional empowerment. As a therapist, mentor, and career coach, Ellie has made it her mission to support girls and women in advancing their leadership. Ellie now focuses solely on coaching driven, growth-minded women in the workplace. She brings a wealth of knowledge gained over decades of guiding people using tailored approaches that meet each client's needs. Whether through one-on-one sessions or workshops, Ellie helps high-performing women in business expand their influence and reach new heights in their careers. She enables clients to maximize their potential by improving confidence, navigating organizational politics, and developing executive presence. Ellie believes that every woman deserves the chance to fulfill her aspirations. Her nuanced approach and wealth of experience give women to the strategies and mindset to succeed on their own terms. Ellie, welcome to the show.
Thank you, Lisa. It's great to be here with you.
It is such an important topic, and we don't even think about how it implicates our entire well-being. Why are boundaries so critical for our mental and emotional health?
So let me just take you back a little bit, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Yeah, so I started out after my graduate degree in the 90s, working with kids primarily, first 8-10 years, also in mental health clinics. Then sort of second, third of the last 30 years, that evolved to working mostly with teens, young adults, and some adults. Then the last 10 years or so, I was working with also still teens and young adults, and then primarily women. More women than men show up to therapy and coaching. So I kept seeing this pattern over and over again of people struggling to say no, to set boundaries around their time and around their energy, even in this day and age where we've evolved, right? We've evolved for women to stand up for themselves and for society to have a better sense of what's needed for both sexes. But still, this kept popping up as a topic. So it's important because personally and professionally, we need to have our energy. We need to keep our self-esteem up and feel like we have, rights to do what we need to do to take care of ourselves. So It's so crucial for overall mental health, but it's not necessarily always identified as such. But when people start digging into where they're struggling, often boundaries comes up.
We need the handbook when we're 5.
Yes.
So that we're not 30 years later trying to undo 30 years of stories to create that future.
Absolutely. Yes. Let's teach young people these emotional intelligence skills. 100%.
How can setting boundaries help us manage stress and anxiety?
Oh gosh, where do we start? Yes.
Somewhere, please.
So in the workplace, I'll give you a couple of examples. That's the best way. So in the workplace, often when I'm meeting with, again, primarily women, there's a repeated theme of, as I mentioned a minute ago, of feeling tired and overwhelmed. Now, for a lot of driven, successful women, that's hard to look at, right? That's a very vulnerable point. People don't want to admit that. But once they start seeing, okay, I can delegate a lot more than I am, I can start believing that I don't, in fact, have to do it all, then all sorts of opportunities open up. I mean, mentally, emotionally, but also in terms of business growth, right? I mean, how can I grow my business really in a healthy way and in a successful way if I'm trying to do it all, right? So, and then personally, you can imagine.
Yes, I can imagine.
All the ways. And I'm sure it comes up with people that you meet with around food and body image. And, I think a key part, though, personally, is what's going on in our minds. What's the boundary around our self-talk? And you mentioned compassion in your introduction. Self-compassion versus as an antidote to self-judgment is something I work on a lot with people.
It's so interesting because I can't remember if it was a guest or somebody who I was talking to, our colleague, and we were talking about self-compassion.
Yeah.
And, the example that we always give is, how would you talk to a friend?
Yeah.
And she literally said, take yourself up and out and put yourself right next to yourself.
Love it.
What are you saying to that person?
Right.
And it was just so visual that I think it gave it a little bit more power than even though it's simplistic, it's not easy. Mm-hmm. What would you say to your friends? Would you use that language to somebody who you really loved and cared about on what you're saying to yourself?
Yep, I love that visual. That works really well for a lot of people.
Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
It was really impactful. Mm-hmm. What about self-esteem and self-worth? Are these negatively impacted when our boundaries are unclear or unenforceable?
Yeah, I think over time, look, everybody, weakens their boundaries here and there at different times. But when it's a chronic kind of persistent thing, so if I'm, regularly acting out of integrity with my values, that's going to hurt my self-esteem, for sure.
And boundaries start to whittle because, they fade for a couple of reasons. Mm-hmm. One is, you're going against the tide. Somebody keeps breaking those boundaries.
Sure.
And sometimes we get lost in what our values are, and our boundaries start to slip.
Yeah, we can collapse under the pressure of others, for sure.
How do our boundaries empower us to live more authentically?
Well, if I'm clear about what I want and I'm clear about who I am, then that's going to include boundaries. And then naturally from that, I'm more likely to live more authentically, I believe.
The more that you know yourself,
mm-hmm.
the easier it is to set those boundaries.
Absolutely.
What are some common signs that someone is struggling with poor boundaries?
Well, again, in the workplace, it can look like overwhelm. It can look like being drained and tired. And personally, it can look that way too. It can also look like a lot of complaining. Like, I don't feel in the driver's seat of my life. I feel like I'm just kind of reacting to things as they come up because I haven't set my limits to what I'm going to tolerate and kind of I call them my non-negotiables. Yeah, so it can look like that. In relationships, it can look like, feeling taken advantage of course, in all different ways. Those are some of the key ways.
It's funny is that when we have a non-negotiable, it reminds me of being so connected to your authentic self.
Yeah.
It's black and white. That is just a hard stop, no.
Yes. It's sort of like, if you're applying for a job, right? It's a good idea to go in and say, okay, this is the salary I'm looking for, or at least this is the absolute minimum that I'm willing to take. I am only willing to travel this distance. Those are non-negotiables. Well, we need that in all areas, not in a rigid way. Definitely don't believe in being rigid. We need to be able to be flexible, right? But I call it clear and firm, because if we're not clear and firm, then we're sort of moving those lines all over the place for anybody who shows up and wants to move them.
I kind of want it, but.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah.
And
yeah.
clear, and that clear and firm.
Yes.
Those
Yes.
are two such distinct words.
Yeah, I love those
And it probably
words.
takes time for people to be able to articulate what a clear and firm boundary is for them over high touch points.
It's part of the reason I love working one-on-one and in small groups, because that gives people the opportunity to really look at the details. What's actually going on in your life? Where's this showing up? Let's take current day-to-day, experiences and take them apart.
It's, working with women in my space a lot is about body image. And there's one experience that when working with somebody, and a grown woman, and her father, from the time that she was a little child, always commented on her body. And setting those boundaries of you're not allowed to comment on my body was a double-edged sword. Because when he didn't comment, she felt that what is he not saying?
Yeah.
And when he did comment, it was the knife to the heart.
Tricky.
How do you deal with that?
Yeah, that's tricky. I mean, it's going to depend on the individual and their relationship and the adult. But what I think it comes down to all the time is that open, clear, and kind communication. Because especially with a young girl who's trying to figure all that out.
Yeah.
And so if we can teach the young people to feel safe talking about whatever it is that's coming up, even if they're back and forth about it, even if they're in one breath saying, but I want you to, and the other breath they're saying, but don't, that's okay, because they're trying to figure all that out.
How do we give our children permission to learn to be able to say no and to set those boundaries, that it is okay to have those limits?
Exactly. And it's why I kind of flip-flop and am interested in working with the children and adults, because we've got to work with the existing adults to teach the children. And as you said, let's start when they're 5.
Right. And what is the parent, because the children are learning the parental behavior.
That's right.
How do we break that cycle where it's not all about always pleasing somebody else?
That's right.
How do we please ourselves first? How can we tell when it is appropriate to say no to someone, especially when we suspect they will be disappointed or upset?
Yeah, so one of the key things that I see with my clients, Lisa, is this training, like we were just talking about a little bit, when they're young, to prioritize someone else's feelings over their own. I mean, in some ways, if you think about children, of course, children want to please their parents or the adults in their lives most of the time, safe to say, right? So we can start with that premise, but then as we just talked about, that if there's a teaching to prioritize someone else's feelings over our own, then it takes a pause at some point in our lives, I think. It takes a pause to slow down and say, wait a minute, my feelings, my views are just as important as the next person's, right? And so, and with that, I can tolerate somebody being disappointed in me. And also, by the way, we make up all sorts of stories in our heads anyway. How do we even know they're going to be disappointed, right? Sometimes they are. Sometimes they are, but sometimes we think, oh, someone's going to be devastatedly disappointed in me and I'm not going to have this relationship anymore.
And it all depends on that other person's perspective and what their teachings and learnings have been.
For sure.
Because we don't know the stories in their head.
Right. So being able to tolerate other people's disappointment or anger is part of having boundaries, for sure.
How do you get over the comment, well, you're selfish?
I just tell people they're not.
You're just black and white.
It's just again, it's either a teaching from the adults in our lives, an explicit teaching, or it's, millennia, right, of us being taught, especially as women, to look after everybody else. I mean, that's sort of wired in us, right? Not sort of, it is.
It is.
It is. So that's okay. And I think it's an ongoing exploration of how do I fulfill that desire, if in fact it is a desire, to take care of other people. And you'll see I love to live in the world of ands. I really do. And it doesn't mean it's selfish to do something for myself first, too. I think it boils down to a belief system.
It's our mindset. And the word and is so much more powerful than the but, because we're not discrediting the first part of our thoughts.
Exactly. So if I go and do something for myself, that doesn't mean that I don't care about other people. Of course it doesn't mean that.
Right. It is the and.
It is the
how
and.
do we have our cake and eat it?
That's right. That's right.
What advice would you give someone who wants to start setting better boundaries but finds it difficult?
Yeah. So what I do with clients is just start with something that feels manageable. Let's start with something small. We're not going to take the most delicate topic unless they've already done some work and they really want to just dive right in. But let's just start with something really small, something manageable, and just take a look at how, in a practical way, it's actually showing up. And how is that lack of boundary serving them or not serving them? Right? And we can look at the story that they've created for themselves over their lives, and once people are willing to look at that story in their head, that personality that's been created over their lifetime, and see how, parts I like, parts maybe I want to let go of, then we can start to just, we can start to inch along and break it down into manageable steps.
It's amazing how when I work with my clients, just somebody else giving them permission starts to open that door, unlock some of those closed doors that have been slammed so tight.
For sure. I think that's fairly common. It's human nature.
Yeah, I see it all the time with working with my clients.
Do you?
Oh, absolutely.
I think that there was a lot in the past around, you shouldn't need external validation. It all needs to come from inside. And I don't believe that. I think sometimes we need that extra support and that extra kind of redirection to kind of get us on the right, on a different track.
How do you depend on yourself? Because when you feel competent, then that extra connection and community starts to even empower you more when somebody's on that lifeboat with you.
Right, for sure. Yeah, having somebody, to bounce things around with and to say, I believe in you, and maybe even ask you some tough questions and question your thinking is really powerful.
I think anytime we make a huge leap forward, knowing that you have somebody who is supporting you makes such a huge difference. I mean, I know personally and professionally that I wouldn't be doing what I'm doing without the support of others around me.
Me too. Me too. Absolutely.
Without saying. What are some examples of healthy boundary setting phrases we can start using right away?
No, thank you. It's tough. It can be tough. I would like to. Yeah. Even my request is, personally or professionally, because again, when I say we, I just mean people in general, often don't realize that they're complaining about the way things are. And if people can see that they can take a complaint and turn it into making a request for something that they need. So my request is, or I would like, or I need, or I want, I mean, those are phrases that I think we, as you said, often think are selfish.
And all they are is expressing that need, the ability that I'm ready to change.
It's all it is. It's all it is. But like with anything, it does take practice.
Yeah. I mean, I always like to say, things they sound simple. It doesn't mean that they're easy.
Mm-hmm.
We are undoing and creating new thoughts and new patterns, and it takes time for it to become your new normal, that you feel confident, where you're not micromanaging every thought on how to ask for that request.
One of the things I love to share with people is, when I was originally trained, the belief was that all of our development and conditioning happened sort of, say, by the time we were 6-ish. The last 10 to 20 years with the developments in neuroscience has shown us that we can create new neural pathways. So exciting. I'm not a neuroscientist.
Right, but neuroplasticity of our ability to change our thoughts.
Right. So now this opens up a whole new world. So with those new, if we can identify the new thinking patterns and practice, I call it mental fitness, just like if you want to go get fit at the gym, if you go once a week, not much is going to happen. So let's practice these new things and see what happens.
Yeah, when I work with my clients, we're always talking about how do we strengthen that new muscle.
Yeah.
And it is not about doing bicep curls. It is about the practice of what those thoughts look like.
Yeah.
And I mean, we know change takes time. I mean, there's so many different stages, and for it to become cement, takes a long time.
Yep.
We all have people in our lives who believe that they have the right to comment on our bodies and food choices, which has deep negative impact. How can we protect ourselves from that type of commentary?
Yeah, and that's such a vulnerable, delicate one. And again, I think it goes back to knowing that, you get to say no, you get to say I'm uncomfortable with that. And really what that sort of ties into is self-trust and tuning into our own intuition, right? Because it's so easy to either ignore our intuition or have a feeling and then second guess it, right? Because it's like, oh,
I shouldn't be thinking
they didn't mean that, or it's not a big deal, or I'm being too sensitive, or things like that. But if we can work to move past those and really honor that something feels uncomfortable, and I'm allowed to say something about that, I think that's the specifics of the how-to is going to depend on the person, the situation.
How do you take, and it happens quickly, because it comes in, it lands, you feel it in your gut, and you have a choice. In that pause, how do you want to respond or react?
That's right. And I think you can freeze in that moment where you feel something, but like you said, is it, are there other people around? Are we out in public?
I'm afraid of hurting their feelings.
I don't want to make a show of this. I don't want the attention on me. And so I think there's nuances, and it takes practice to figure out, like, what am I going to try out? And let me just experiment a little bit with it and see what feels okay.
And the word experiment is such a powerful word.
Yeah.
And it's something that I use a lot with my clients, so that it is not all or nothing, that if it didn't land the way that you wanted it to land, you learned something from it. You didn't fail.
Right.
You went out there, you tried it. What can you shift to make it feel a little bit more comfortable, or is it just practice that you need to get it out there a few more times?
I love the word experiment, and for me, I was a person who, I wanted to get it right before I did the thing.
Yeah.
Right? You get that?
Oh, for sure.
Yeah. And so experimenting is so freeing. I can feel that energy when I say it to my clients. Like, let's just try it for a week, see what happens.
And you can feel their resistance drop.
Yeah.
It is such a it's I'm trying to think of the best way to put it. Their response and receptiveness raises.
Yes.
As opposed to, I need to do this.
Yeah.
All it is an experiment. What works? What can we learn?
That's
What's
right.
the gift and the opportunity out of that experiment? It's a win no matter what.
It's a win, because in experiments there is failure. There are mistakes. So.
And how do we
go
use
with that.
those? Yep, absolutely. How should we set loving yet firm boundaries with family members who may be overstepping? Does anybody have family members like that?
No, nobody.
Nobody.
I think that when we're trying to remember to be loving and compassionate, we can always preface a boundary with, if it's appropriate to the person, I know you're coming from a good place, or I know you have good intentions when you say such and such, but for me, this is how it feels, or something like that.
Trying to be kind and compassionate, acknowledge what you believe that it is coming from, so that you're not discrediting and belittling what they feel is important to share, their opinion.
Yep. Right.
What about in the workplace? What role can boundaries play in fostering a positive work experience or advancing one's career?
So there's two scenarios that I see come up a lot that I work on with clients. And one is, speaking up to the boss.
It's hard.
It's really hard. And I actually work with clients on changing that belief that it's hard. Because again, I think that's a story that's been created over time that somehow it's hard. So we try to let go of that belief and go in and see, because often it's not as hard as we thought it was, right? So what do you need to speak up to your boss about? And then what do you need to speak to, let's just say, team members or direct reports about? Maybe it's how often you want to have them report to you, and really setting out clear agreements for how that goes. Again, with people under you or with the boss.
It takes away the unknown, and that's where it gets scary.
Yeah.
When you have those boundaries and you can set, and the expectations are clear and firm, it's easy to be able to walk within that path.
Exactly. Right, because I think often we think we're being clear in our communication because we kind of hinted at something, or we kind of think somebody should know, but they don't. So let's get really, really clear about what it is you're looking for, and don't go in assuming that you're going to be asking too much or assuming that you're going to hurt someone's feelings. That may be true, but it also may not be true.
And you don't know.
And you don't know. So, but what you need to know is what you need to work well, to function effectively, and to have strong, healthy, trusting relationships.
It's complicated, or it's only as complicated as you make it to be. So
right.
Once you get into it, it's kind of like automatic pilot. But thinking about one's behavior on how you have overcomplicated things based on your own thoughts and stories.
Exactly.
What tips do you have for recognizing manipulative or passive-aggressive behavior aimed at eroding our boundaries?
That's a great question. Sometimes people will know it if they tune in to their gut. Sometimes people are so out of tune with that they do need to recognize that life in some way is off the rails and then go get help.
We discredit our intuition so often. And
we just haven't been trained to even listen in, to really listen in, because for lots of different reasons, but partly I think a lot of people think that the head and the body are two separate pieces. And so we've got to learn how to really tune in to the body and to senses.
It's so interesting because I cover so many different topics on this show. And one of the main things that I am noticing is the use of the word of intuition and really connecting to what those messages are. And it's so foreign to so many of us who are not in this field.
Right.
I think about the way that I was 7 years ago before I got into coaching.
Yep.
And how I am today is light years.
Yes. Yeah, well, let me say something about that, because I think you're right. I think intuition that word is used a lot now in personal development, but we can really simplify it to just noticing how we feel. Just a check-in. And when we aren't racing at light speed through our days, then we can get a little more sense of like, ooh, how did that feel?
The racing, that in itself keeps you totally disconnected from your mind and your body.
Yep.
When you slow down, that is when body speak happens, when you can start to hear it.
Yeah, as I transitioned from my therapy practice to coaching practice, as you mentioned at the beginning, I work with a lot of very driven, smart, high-performing women. And when I say the word slow down, the phrase slow down, I can just sense this cringe, right? And so I have to explain that does not mean you're going to sit around and do nothing. And actually, it does not mean that you're going to be less successful or anything like that. In fact, it's counterintuitive, but you can accomplish more. But people have to see that for themselves. It's very counterculture and counterintuitive.
It's for sure. And I know, like, when I'm hitting my maximum capacity, is I will start to try to tune in and listen to something, and I can't process it. Yeah. I know that I am on total overload, that I cannot bring in one more piece of information, and going through it isn't helping. And it's hard to say, okay, it's time to just take a step back, because there's always so much to do, and you want to accomplish, and you want to be successful. And quieting the noise and listening to that inner voice makes such a difference.
Yeah, and some people do that more easily. And then, for me, I love to take in information. I love to learn. And so I can just stay in that place. And as you said, that makes the mind so busy. For other people, they like to go and do, and fill in their day with, as many things on their list as they possibly can. And so whatever that looks like for each person, it is good to be aware of, where am I racing, if I am, and where can I just pause a little bit more often. It could just be a minute, 3 deep breaths. It doesn't have to be you have to start an hour meditation practice every day, or anything like that.
The power of the pause, whether it's 15 seconds, 30 seconds, a few minutes. And the more that you are connected to your values and your hopes and dreams, the easier it is to set those boundaries.
Definitely.
What should someone do if their attempts to set boundaries are continually ignored? How can we gracefully stand up for ourselves with our boundaries are being crossed?
Yeah, so practice writing out. Here's a good idea for people. You can practice writing out where you feel that's happening. So again, get really specific, because otherwise we sort of live in this haze of
the gray
of sort of discomfort or fear, and it just feels all kind of fuzzy. So you want to get really clear, and you could do that by writing it out. Where is this happening? With whom? What would I rather be doing or saying or not doing or not saying? You can start by doing that, and then go ahead and try a little practice. And again, if you can't, get the support of someone that you really trust, to bounce it around with, to, review afterwards, to get that sort of clarity or validation, and it takes the doing, it takes the doing in just little steps. If it's another situation where there isn't safety, that's a whole nother scenario. We need to go get professional help then.
What has been the most powerful lesson you've learned about boundaries personally or from your clients?
Ooh, the most powerful lesson. I think we've said it. I really do. I think it's knowing your values, being really clear about what you want in your life, and then being willing to stick to that, because that creates all sorts of opportunities. And it creates really strong, loving relationships, which is, of course, what we all want.
We all want to feel connected and included, and it starts with being connected to ourselves.
Yeah, yes.
It's when I work with clients, one of the first steps that we do is a health and wellness vision plan, and helping them really understand where do they want to be in this future time. And then from there, we work on setting those goals. It's, here's our long range goals, but let's break it down to where are we today? What is that smallest step that you can confidently take that's going to be in line with your values and your hopes and your dreams? And that's how we start to work towards whatever it is. And often it is about setting boundaries on what they're willing to do or not do.
Our work overlaps so much.
Oh, for sure.
It really does. And it just goes to show, whether it's around food, the body, your personal life, your relationships, your work.
Yeah,
it's important.
Absolutely. Before you tell us about this week's practice, are there any other words of wisdom that you would like to share?
You mentioned earlier about self-compassion, and one of the, I'll share with you later if I haven't already, a booklet that I wrote recently about what can women use to have impact in the workplace, and that of course goes for personal life too. But and one of the points I make in this booklet is that self-judgment is one of the biggest areas where women get tripped up. So the way to work with that is self-compassion. And I sort of hesitate to say that because again, it's one of these words that just being used and used and used in the person. But this is what happens with language, right?
Right.
So, but it really does start with that, because once we can do that, then we don't say we're being selfish. Then we say that our lives are just as important as the other 10 people we're taking care of and so forth, right? And then we can set the really clear boundaries.
I've been working with a colleague, and we're going to be doing a future workshop. And one of the exercises she brought up was, if you're in a lifeboat, who do you save?
Yep.
And everyone spends time thinking about who to save.
Yep.
And they never think about saving themselves.
It's a tricky question. It's a little catch there.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So, how do you feel confident in saying, like, I'm just as worthy as those around me?
It's the old oxygen mask on yourself first idea, right?
Exactly.
Yeah, it is a little counterintuitive. Yep.
Yeah. So thank you for sharing all this information, and tell me about the practice that you would like to share today.
Sure, yes. Well, a question that I really love, which is simple but not necessarily easy, is what am I tolerating? So once you ask yourself that question, again, in any area of your life, then you start to get into and get clearer about, where am I relinquishing what I believe in? And what's most important to me? And what do I want? The number of times I've asked clients over many years, what do you want? And their sort of jaw drops, like, but I've never even thought of that, is astounding. So what am I tolerating? Write it down, take a little bit of time for yourself, and just start exploring it. It could be painful, but we have to go through the pain to get to the other side. So it's well worth it.
And tolerating it, some people don't even understand what they're tolerating. So it takes that time to notice that, going back to that word of intuition, of noticing that uncomfortableness that is coming somewhere in your body to give you that clue that this is not landing well.
Yes, absolutely. Can always use the body.
For sure.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for this conversation. I know that it could go on in 10 different directions.
Yes.
Today we have learned about the importance of setting clear and firm boundaries, taking our power back, and improving our mental and emotional well-being with this skill. If you're looking to continue the conversation, please visit me for my monthly office hours and conversations. And as always, I would love to hear what's important to you. Be sure to join me next time on Getting Healthy Without Rules.